I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. The 2026 primary election in Maryland is over. It's going to be Democrat Wes Moore against Republican Dan Cox for governor yet again, and Democrat Will Joando against Republican Esther Wells for Montgomery County Executive. You can predict those outcomes as if it were sunrise the next day. We'll move on to the most talked about issue in the campaign season: data centers. We've done several data center episodes and segments over the last year, and especially during the last few months of the primary campaign season. And today we bring you lessons from Data Center Alley, Loudoun County, Virginia, just across the Potomac River from Montgomery County, Maryland. Like most economic activity, data centers promise much. 45% of Loudoun County's tax revenues come from data centers, which allows the jurisdiction to keep its property taxes lower than anywhere else in the Washington metropolitan region by as much as 25%. For every dollar Loudoun gets from data centers cost the county 4 cents. Data centers don't generate school students or significant traffic. Compare that with residential homes, from which every tax dollar generated creates a dollar or more of county spending on schools and roads. Not for nothing, Maryland passed the Critical Infrastructure Streamlining Act of 2024, and Governor Moore has been a strong supporter of bringing data centers to the state. Clearly, data centers, like most economic activity, also bring negatives. They generate noise and carbon emissions, and energy demand and water issues, and in turn, protests, even in Loudoun County, where the benefits of data centers are widely recognized. Drawing the line to balance public good and public costs is always the policy challenge. What is important here is that refusing data centers in a community does not keep the cost of data centers at bay for that community if others invite them to theirs. Maryland and Virginia, for example, are part of the same electricity market. So if Maryland bans data centers while Virginia welcomes them, Maryland residents still pay higher demand driven electricity rates. Maybe not as much as Virginia residents, but not insignificant either. Striking the balance between public good and public costs is not just tough, but close to impossible. There isn't a clear compromise middle path, but rather policy swings as policymakers change, and who policymakers are listening to also changes. The origin of the data center alley in Loudoun County go back to around the year 2000. Three things allowed it. First, the Federal Research and Development Agency, ARPA, had put in a big underground fiber optic network in the area, which offered super fast data transmission speeds into Washington, D.C., where at that time the government was rapidly adopting the internet to do its work. Second, presented with permit applications to build data centers in the county, the then zoning administrator in Loudoun ruled that data centers were just another office park. In those days, they were. Data centers were relatively small and could easily fit in office buildings. These small data centers still exist even in Montgomery County. The result of that ruling was that Loudoun allowed data center building by right, which in permitting speak means that a project is automatically approved if it meets existing zoning, building, and environmental codes. The third was a statewide sales tax exemption for data centers in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. By the mid 2010s, as demand for streaming services grew and businesses and services moved to the digital world, data centers began to grow bigger. But they were still not overwhelming until the pandemic. Their electricity demand was not outrageous. They remained mostly at a distance from residential developments in mainly industrial areas, so the noise problem was limited. But the pandemic and then AI exploded data center demand. Work from home, Zoom and WebEx and Teams meetings, and even more streaming content pushed data center demand. And then in 2022, ChatGPT made its appearance. Now, data centers are the linchpin of our contemporary economy. Mike Turner was elected to the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, their county council, in 2019, just about the time when the negative effects of data centers started to become visible. After 6 years in the thick of data center politics, he wrote a white paper on the best practices for local jurisdictions and has been on a roadshow to help other jurisdictions figure out the path forward. I will add a link to the white paper in the show notes. Mike Turner is now the vice chair of Loudoun County's Board of Supervisors, and he joins us with the lessons from Loudoun. Stay with us. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Baltimore-based musician Seth Keibel's new album, Clarinet Without a Net. Maximilian Jacobs on violin, Erin Murphy Snedecor on cello, R.N. Buckheister, dobro, acoustic guitar and mandolin, Tom Holtz, helicon, Rowan Corbett, percussion, and Seth Keibel himself on the clarinet. Jeff Gruber at Blue House Productions in Silver Spring recorded, mixed, and mastered the album. Mike Turner, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Happy to be here, Sunil.
You have written a white paper on the lessons from Loudoun for data center policy for the rest of us. What are your takeaways?
I guess in a nutshell, particularly given the national, how shall I refer this? I want to say hysteria, but that has a negative connotation. But that's what it is. I have firmly believed that there is nothing inherently good or bad about data centers. They are a thing. And it is up to the local governing body to establish the guardrails and the managerial criteria and the restraints on the development of data centers in that particular community.
You're obviously seeking a balance between the cost and the benefits of data center. Has Loudoun achieved the right balance?
I would say overall, yes, but it's a caveated yes. You have to remember, we were the first. We're the most mature data center community in the world. We've got 53 million square feet of data centers, 253 built on the ground. We got another bunch that are in the pipeline that may or may not get built. Our projected fiscal 27 budget is $2.9 billion in local tax revenue. That's basically our county's operating budget. $2.9 billion in revenue, and of that, $1.3 billion is going to be data center revenue, about 45%. We have the lowest property taxes in the DC metro area by about 25%. They cost the county about 4 cents for every dollar of tax revenue they bring in, and normal business, small business will cost about 25 cents for every dollar of revenue. They don't put cars on our roads. They don't put kids in our schools. We've been the fastest growing county. We're not anymore, but we were for about 20 years the fastest growing county in Virginia, one of the fastest growing in the United States. And it was our data center revenue that allowed us to keep the fundamental nature of Loudoun County as to what it is, a beautiful county. I love hearing. The reason it's a more complex answer than that is because Basically, in 2022, we got hit with the California gold rush, and nobody can anticipate the unintended consequences of that. Up until that point, the growth was largely planned and largely anticipated. They grew in our industrial areas. We allowed some by right development, meaning if you buy a piece of land that has a permitted use, one of the permitted uses is data centers, you can build that data center without permission from the governing body. Maybe in 2020, the data centers had started to outgrow the land available in our industrial area. And so they had started to buy land where data centers could be built without permission from the local governing body. If we had to do all over again, probably we would not have allowed what's called by right development of data centers. That was based on a ruling by our zoning administrator in 2000. And everybody kind of understood what a data center was, but they were, a 10 megawatt data center was a pretty big data center back then. And so she made the ruling that we think data centers are like office parks and therefore they should be treated like office parks. When she made that ruling, it was good ruling based on the available evidence she had at the time. And for probably 15, 17, 18 years, it had no major effect. Around about 2020 or so, we started seeing data centers that have not come before the board for approval popping up next to residential neighborhoods. And that's when I, as the chair of the Transportation Land Use Committee and several other supervisors said, we got to get a handle on what's going on here. Where are they being built? Where do we want them? Where don't we want them? In 2022, three things happened. We came out of COVID and the world had discovered, gosh, digital, this is really cool. I want more of this. And so there was an exponential, historic increase in demand for digital stuff. Chat GPT hit the street for the first time. So AI became a practical using tool, a practical tool in the summer of 2022. And then here in Loudoun County, the Northeast Power Authority, PJM, informed Dominion Energy, our local electric utility, that they had underestimated the infrastructure needed for the next 5 years by a factor of 10. And they were actually going to need not $65 million, but $650 million worth of new infrastructure. Dominion immediately established a constrained area and told all of our customers here in Loudoun County, particularly the data centers, you're capped at 20% of what we agreed to provide you in power until the foreseeable future, until we figure out what we're going to do here. And so they came up with an infrastructure development plan. That cap was established, I believe, in September of 2022. And it was only lifted here recently, this past December of 25, because they energized the Wishing Star to Mars power line, which is in southern Loudoun County. It's extra power. It's a 500 230 line combination that goes directly to Data Center Alley and provided them with sufficient power to lift the constraints. We have 7 new power lines planned for eastern Loudoun County. That's when we started to say in the summer of 22, we need to take a look at this. Well, that was 22 and it's now 26. It's taken 4 years.
I want to ask a little bit of history. Why did you have a fiber optic network that was underground in the first place?
That was a project for the Advanced Research Project Agency Energy, ARPA-E,
Okay, ARPA-E.
In the late 90s. They realized they needed to create a state-of-the-art data transfer capacity. Fiber optic cable, the amount of fiber optic cable you have is your latency rate. So the lower the latency rate, that means the faster data moves from point A to point B.
Sure.
So ARPA had laid down this network of fiber optic cable, and it was reinforced by AOL and MCI WorldCom at the time. And then at one point in the early 2000s, Equinix, who's one of our largest data center companies here in town, took that project over. And together, they, somewhere in there, I don't know the exact timing, they established a Metropolitan Area Exchange East for the internet, May East. And that became a major internet hub because it was so close to Washington. So we had all this underground fiber optic cable that they'd anticipated to build out for various reasons. And our economic development director, realized that gave us an enormous advantage in the data center world. And that's when the data centers started to get attracted to come here to Eastern Loudoun.
So it is federal investment that
Yes.
initiates this.
Yes.
Okay. You talked about Dominion, your utility, introducing a constrained zone. How did that work even? I mean, one of the big questions is obviously the data centers are led to this increase in demand. And there is things about whether you can cap the peaking demand and all of that. Putting a constrained zone is technically very difficult because what do? You go, between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., you're not going to use this data center.
If a data center has signed an electricity service agreement that we need 100 megawatts, they don't use 100 megawatts every hour. They might use an average of 10 or 12 or 15 megawatts an hour most of the time. I don't know what the physical mechanism is by which the consumer then says, okay, I'm constrained now. I can only use 20% of what I agreed to with Dominion.
In your paper, you make the distinction between energy use for training AI and energy use required when you have transmission actually to the consumer.
That really doesn't apply to Loudoun County in any significant way. And here's why. As I understand it, artificial intelligence has really two phases, the training phase and the inference phase. The training phase is really not that dependent on latency, the fiber optic, because you're not communicating outside to a customer. You're internal, you're training the AI model to learn the machine language that it needs to do its job. So that can really be anywhere. It's not all that latency dependent. We don't have, I don't believe we have any AI training data centers in Loudoun County. Virtually all of our data centers, my understanding is, are inference data centers. They are basically co-location data centers. I don't know how they constrain themselves to that 20%, but if they're at the time only operating at 10% on average, then all that's it's kind of a warning shot saying, okay, you can't go to 100, but you can go up to 20. The Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission report that came out on December 9th in 2024 said thus far there has not been a significant increase in electricity rates in the Commonwealth of Virginia as a result of data centers.
Do you believe that?
I took the report at its worth. That was when Dominion realized it needed to build a whole lot more infrastructure. And that report said, however, even though thus far there have not been an appreciable increase in electricity rates, it's coming. We can't build another $650 million worth of infrastructure over the next 5 years and not have some portion of that passed on to the consumers, all the consumers. Now, that's one of the reasons that Dominion has proposed a tariff structure to the State Corporation Commission, which has said, I want to say it's over a 12-year period, but I may be wrong in that. The large power consumers will have to pay upfront 65% of the cost of new generation and 85% of the cost of new transmission and distribution to ease the burden on the residential consumer. Now, that still means the residential consumer is going to have to pick up 35% of generation and 15% of transmission and distribution. So there will be an increase in power costs, electricity bills.
You said that local government, and I emphasize local in this, right? The local government has to set the guardrails. Do you think the local government has the authority and capability?
That's true. Because we're a regulated monopoly state, it is against the law for a local governing body to make a decision about a land use application based on power. The Loudoun County Board submitted proposed legislation to this last session to allow local governments that if their local grid is constrained, that we would be allowed to use that as a factor in determining whether we want to approve a land application. That didn't even make it out of its first committee meeting.
The opposition to data centers in Loudoun County, what is the nature of that opposition? You call it hysteria elsewhere. What are they opposing?
Noise is the worst. We've got one particular application that tried something new and is having real problems with noise in the local residential neighborhood. I would say that the opposition in Loudoun County has been growing since the summer of 22. The biggest opposition to data centers in Loudoun County is the by right development of data centers. There's always been the objection to data centers about noise. That's always been a problem, but it's been fairly isolated with certain data centers. It hasn't been writ large.
Okay.
It has not been an overwhelming problem. The nature of the complaints has really risen since the summer of 22 because of the rapid proliferation of data centers. And a lot of those, the majority of those since 2022 have been by right data center development that the board didn't get to vote on. When I took office in 2019, I had no data centers in Ashburn District. I've now got 5. Or actually 4 and 1 right on my border. I voted on 1, but technically I haven't gotten to vote on any of them. The one that I voted on, basically initially came to us and wanted to build a 2.9 million square foot data center and wanted permission to do that. I voted no. And they came back a month later and said, okay, we're allowed by right without your permission to build 1.3 million square feet of data center. If you allow us to build that 1.3 million square feet now, we will keep all the protections that we propose for the Goose Creek and all the environmental protections. We'll keep that in. If you vote no and make us go away 6 months and come back with a by right application for the same 1.3 million square feet, we're going to strip out all those environmental considerations.
This is the nature of the problem that causes the hysteria, right? You're trying to establish guardrails, and they said, if you don't do it now, we'll come back and we will not protect the environment. So they really did threaten you.
Yeah. And it threaten might be a hard word. It's a business proposition. It was an administrative process. If you approve it now, we'll include all of these. And if you don't approve it, that's fine. We'll just come back and we'll do what we're allowed to do without your permission. And it won't have any of these protections in it. Those are the kinds of give and take kind of conversations that you have to have in every land application, not just data center.
The fear in community is that data center developers or developers more generally do this kind of thing. So therefore, they're like, okay, we don't want any.
In the 6.5 years as an elected official, I would have to say that the number of what I would consider to be even marginally disreputable business entities that I've had to deal with as a supervisor, I could probably count on one hand and have fingers left over. These are business entities in a marketplace that is undergoing historic tectonic shifts, and they are being forced to respond to a market where demand is unprecedented, and they're doing their best to respond to that demand, and they're going to follow the path of least resistance. I understand that. My job as an elected official is to not just willy-nilly create more resistance. It's to establish proper guidelines so that the impact is minimal on my local community and I protect the quality of life of my constituents.
Most economic activity is beneficial and then, has a cost. Electricity generation is extraordinarily beneficial for modern life. But if we do it with coal, we put a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. Where have you found the balance, or is it every case, every community is sui generis?
It's unique to every community. That's the message that I try and give communities. And it's a burden that's on the elected officials.
There is a point of conflict there. They seek the path of least resistance, and you want guardrails that don't allow the path of least resistance. So there's going to be this kind of conflict and once this conflict comes to a head, the population gets ginned up, and then they make decisions and demand things like moratorium.
Our constituents, they don't want to get involved in an esoteric discussion about the ins and outs of the engineering of the data center. I'm their representative. They want me to solve the problem. They got a data center that's 100 feet tall, 60 feet off their back property line, and it's generating 75 decibels of noise 24 hours a day. They want me to do something about it. I totally get that. It's incumbent upon me to preemptively try and design these things or constrain these things to say you cannot build a 100-foot, 60 feet off the back property line, generate 75 decibels of noise. You've got to follow these rules. Now, if you follow these rules, sure, go ahead and build your data center. We think these rules are designed. But now the challenge in Loudoun County is we are having to retroactively apply these new understood rules that we've developed through experience retroactively to 253 data centers, and I'm not sure how we do that.
How's it going?
I think we're doing a very credible job. We stopped by right data center development. Now every new data center's got to come to the board. We are now in active process of talking about incentives and disincentives to get existing data centers to upgrade their backup generators, to put in more noise mitigation. So we know the standards we're trying to aspire to. We're rewriting our zoning ordinance right now to include new performance standards.
What are the things you're doing to catch up? In your paper, for example, you say that it should be at least 500 feet, but better to have 1,000 feet away.
After all the research I've done over the last 2.5 years, my team and I came up with these 6 factors that anytime you're going to build a data center, you got to answer these 6 factors: noise, power, water, emissions, setback, and appearance. The first one, priority in Loudoun County, is noise. That's the one we get the most complaints about. Noise to me is an easy technological solution. May cost you some money, but noise can be mitigated. I have a colleague on the county staff who went to the Navy PAX up in Maryland, Patuxent River, and they had a hangar there, and they were doing testing to see what effect jet noise has on radio transmissions. And they had two Navy jet fighters hanging from the ceiling in a building. And they had taken out the power turbines, so it didn't blow the building apart, but they could run the engines at max power, and they would run the engines at max power, and he could go in the office next door and not hear anything. So there is technology to mitigate noise. It's a matter of cost and time and effort, but you can mitigate noise. And so the problem in Loudoun County is not that we haven't identified those 6 factors. It's the fact that it took 25 years of growth in the data center industry for us to understand where those factors have to be dealt with and how to deal with them.
Well, one of the biggest complaints businesses have about government is that it comes in retroactively and changes the rules.
That's true. But again, it goes right back to market failure. If supply gets out of whack with demand, somebody's got to step in and do something until they come back into balance.
Many of the folks that oppose data centers, in Maryland at least, are arguing that they would like to see renewables be the primary energy source. If it's the backup, it's use a battery rather than gas turbines. Which is renewable usage even a possibility from after your study?
No. Renewables have a capacity factor, solar 23% and wind 35%. So that means if you have a 100 megawatt solar field, it's only going to deliver 100 megawatts 23% of the time. That's what drives you, in my judgment, as to why the industry is going to eventually go to small modular nuclear reactors. The capacity factor is 92%, and it's emissions free and noise free and doesn't emit a greenhouse gas, then that's probably where the industry is going to go. That's the long-term solution, I believe.
The industry is going to go there, but is Loudoun County going to go there?
I doubt it. I cannot imagine the Loudoun County population sitting still for small modular reactors located in Loudoun County. What I will say is I think the government will install small modular reactors on government property to start with. The government has already agreed to establish a first modular reactor at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. And the fact that Dulles Airport sits right next to Data Center Alley makes it really attractive. The community protest around nuclear power in Loudoun County would be historic.
You have another very neat idea in your paper, which is the high voltage DC grid.
All of our transmission lines overhead, vast majority of them in the East Coast, are high voltage AC alternating current lines. They're the big transmission lines you see overhead. It's very difficult to bury them. There's only been one case of a 500 kilovolt line being buried. That was in Chino Hills, California. Took 10 years to do it, 7 years of court battles, and 3 years of actually building it. It cost $225 million. And that was 20 years ago. You can't really bury high voltage AC. However, high voltage DC is easy to bury. You can transmit 2 gigawatts of power in 2 lines of high voltage DC in a 5-foot trench and plant plants over the 5-foot trench. And so my proposal in my paper was, why not completely separate high voltage DC and distribution DC grid in Loudoun County just for our data center community? I've asked several of the data centers, they can operate almost their entire internal operation on DC power. So they artificially convert the AC power to DC for their internal operation. Why not bring it to them in DC power underground and then let them run off DC power internally? The answer I have recently gotten from the power companies is there is currently no technology to step down the high voltage DC to internal DC power at lower voltages.
You have certain best practices proposals that you've put forward. Do you find other jurisdictions, states accepting these and trying to put them into law, create the guardrails?
One, Delaware County, that actually wrote its new ordinance based on my 15 best practices. This is now my 3rd or 4th conversation today. I had one with Georgia this morning. I had one with Spotsylvania County just before I got on with you. And they want to talk to me about how to incorporate some of these ideas in writing their ordinance. The other vehicle that a lot of communities have, because this is a fast-moving train, if you don't have the time to rewrite your zoning ordinance, then you have the possibility of a community benefit agreement, a CBA, where a data center company or developer comes to town and says, all right, we want to build a data center. You actually sit down in a transparent way and fine, but you can build it with the following provisions. And in the community benefit agreement, you fold in all of my 6 factors.
Community benefit agreements are quite widespread, especially for sports stadiums. But oftentimes, the community complains that the developer does not live up to them.
The proof is in the pudding. Is a developer going to live up to its agreement, and what is your recourse if they don't? I mean, I would say that's got to be a critical piece of it.
Do any data centers in Loudoun get tax abatements?
All data centers in Virginia get a sales tax exemption. And as I understand the way the sales tax exemption works, the data center gets an exemption on having to pay sales tax on the product it produces. However, they value that product, the data that it produces. Presumably, I would think it would apply to the rent that they charge for rack space in their data center. So they don't have to pay sales taxes on that income. That's a huge factor. And I have heard that the one thing that could really impact the data center industry in Virginia is getting rid of the sales tax exemption. That just narrowly did not get passed. I just read in the headline today that I believe that Governor Spanberger, and I could be wrong, I didn't read the full article, so I don't know where that ended up, but I know that there was a move to get rid of the Virginia sales tax exemption, and that will have an unknown effect. Loudoun County does not, in of itself, we've never used taxes to attract data centers to our Loudoun County. State estimates that the sales tax exemption cost the state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, $1.7 billion a year. And that's why there's a big push to get rid of it. The unintended consequence might be, and you also might lose all your data centers.
Do the data centers pay any taxes to the state? So is that $1.7 billion mitigated by something else?
I don't know that. I know the county tax structure. So we get real property tax from the property the data centers sit on, and we get a business personal property tax of the equipment inside the data center. I don't know what taxes that they pay to the Commonwealth.
Data centers in 2027 will give Loudoun County $1.3 billion.
That's right.
That's less than $1.7 billion they take. You don't think this is a transfer of wealth from other Virginia counties to Loudoun?
No, this would be an additional tax levied on the data center community in the Commonwealth of Virginia writ large. This would have nothing to do with $1.3 billion. We would still get our $1.3 billion in taxes.
Loudoun County Board of Supervisors Vice Chair Mike Turner, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Sunil. I enjoyed it.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Baltimore-based musician Seth Keibel's new album, Clarinet Without a Net. Maximilian Jacobs on violin, Erin Murphy Snedecor on cello, R.N. Buckheister, dobro, acoustic guitar and mandolin, Tom Holtz, helicon, Rowan Corbett, percussion, and Seth Keibel himself on the clarinet. Jeff Gruber at Blue House Productions in Silver Spring recorded, mixed, and mastered the album. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.